Hey everyone, welcome to the Left Hook. Apparently, I'm trending, and whenever I'm trending, it's never good. But this is Heidi Beirich, Dr. Heidi Beirich. You need to know her, you need to follow her because Heidi has been in the trenches doing all the work that no one else wants to do, following the number one domestic terror threat in America, which is white nationalist groups. She has been trying to sound the alarm for, I don't know, forever. She's like a modern day Paul Revere, but like if imagine if Paul Revere, instead of people listening to Paul Revere, they're like, it's Paul Revere. And they shot him off the horse. And still Heidi's like, I'm still here trying to warn you. Dr. Heidi Beirich is the co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, and Heidi was the head of the intelligence project at the Southern Poverty Law Center. That's when we first met. She's still been at it, folks, and this is even pre-Trump. And Heidi has been following these groups, their ideologies, the conspiracy theories, and how they have, in a way, infiltrated and I would say taken over the modern conservative movement and MAGA. And I would also take it a step further, how this hate and this hateful ideology has gone not just mainstream but global. I believe it's a transnational global terror threat. And folks, there's so much chaos that no one connects the dots, right? And because Donald Trump is so entrenched with it, instead of talking about white nationalists, terrorism, white supremacy, what do we talk about instead? Antifa, BLM. And so the framing of today's conversation, and Dr. Heidi is literally the expert on this, so I'm so glad she said yes, is how MAGA has mainstreamed white nationalism and embraced domestic terror, which sounds like a mouthful and might be melodramatic, but I assure you, this is where we are right now in 2025. So that was a setup. Heidi, for just before we break it all down, just so people have a good understanding of the language, when we're talking about white nationalism, how would you define it to the average Jose?
Yeah, white nationalism is the belief that white people are superior to people of all other races or ethnicities, and that white people should rule the countries in which they are a majority. Or white nationalists, of course, believe that they've always been a majority in places like the US, Europe, and it's their right, their birthright to control those spaces. Usually, white nationalists believe in some form of ethnic cleansing, the idea that, you got to get rid of non-white, people of color, got to get them out. Otherwise, white people are under attack. They'll claim that this isn't violent ethnic cleansing, but I'm not sure exactly how you do that. And then they usually advocate for something like a white ethno state. Look, they want racist countries controlled by whites. That's what they want.
And is white supremacy then if you would talk about white supremacy, is that the philosophy, the ideology that then fuels white nationalism? Is that how how they intersect?
Yeah, I think white nationalism and white supremacy are essentially interchangeable. There's
Okay.
no difference. In fact, the term white nationalist was created by white nationalists to sort of soften the blow that white supremacy says. So if I have the choice, I call these white supremacist movements.
Oh, okay, okay. White supremacist moves, and then now linking that to the domestic terror threat. People who tune into Left Hook, I keep telling them the data repeatedly shows for the past several years, the number one domestic terror threat is the amalgamation of all these different groups that nonetheless have the nexus of white nationalism.
Yeah, there's no question. And the FBI, at least prior to Trump taking over, has year after year after year, starting in about 2018, said that white supremacy is the number one domestic terrorism threat. So, I mean, think about the mass shootings in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, the Walmart in El Paso. They're also international. Think about the Christchurch mosque shootings. These are all violence fueled by white supremacy, and those are the most spectacular. But we shouldn't forget that hate crimes are essentially mini domestic terrorism incidents as well.
And you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned that those horrific shootings because they all happened within like a year of each other. And I just want to take the DeLorean back. It was 2018 midterms. The economy was pretty good. Donald Trump, like any normal politician, should have just ran on the economy and touted the economy. If he did, he probably would have not lost so many seats. Him, I mean MAGA, Republican movement. Instead, can you just remind people what he and Republicans chose to run on in 2018, which coincided with the spike in terrorist violence, especially in Tree of Life when it came to Jews, and then later in Christchurch, also in El Paso, Texas.
God, I can't remember the specifics of what he was running on, but I'm guessing immigration because that's been the
Yeah.
drumbeat. Yeah, that's been his drumbeat since the get-go. And the position, which we're now living with, the cruelty of the immigration raids and so on, that comes right out of this white nationalist playbook.
Mm.
Meaning, if you want a white ethno state, right, if that's your goal, you've got to get rid of these brown skinned and darker skinned immigrants, right? They're a threat to you. And the language has gotten worse and worse and worse on this front to the point where Trump, many people in the Republican Party have used the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, this idea that there's a plot. Sometimes they blame Jews, sometimes they blame George Soros or globalists, but it's literally a plot to displace white people in their home countries.
Yeah, and so it was caravan. He said there's a caravan's coming, caravan's coming, and then Fox all he talked about is the caravan, 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 and coinciding with that language, you had the white supremacist in Pittsburgh who went and killed 11 Jews at the Tree of Life synagogue. Who and people forget he said, "Screw your optics, I'm going in. I have to punish the evil, filthy Jews for bringing in the evil, filthy Muslims." It was, folks, people don't connect the dots. If anyone else did it, they would have. But he literally copied Donald Trump's language about invasion and caravan. And then a few months later, at Christchurch in New Zealand, a man with a video camera acting like a Call of Duty gamer goes into two mosques, kills 50 Muslims, leaves behind this manifesto, the replacement theory. And then a couple months after that, inspired by him, a Patrick Crucius, I remember, in El Paso, Texas, opens fire and kills all these folks. And for him, the invaders weren't Muslims, they were Hispanics. But specifically, I don't know if you remember this, but I think to tie it and why I think it's a transnational movement. The killer in Christchurch was really inspired by Anders Breivik of Norway. And can you tell people about Anders Breivik and why the ghost, even though he's still alive, the tragedy of Anders Breivik haunts us today? And that was in Norway.
Yeah, that was probably the most spectacular anti Muslim or Great Replacement attack that happened because Breivik first bombed a building and then went on this shooting spree against young teenagers who were on an island right outside the capital of Norway. He was targeting them because they were the children of a left wing party. And he believed that if they were to grow up, they would bring more Muslims into Norway and into Europe. He wrote a huge, massive, terrible to read manifesto in which he claimed he was a modern day crusader, right? So it was a very anti-Muslim, Great Replacement thing, and it was the beginning of a long string of attacks. Actually, if you look at all the attacks, there's literally dozens of them, some successful, some thankfully not successful, that are fueled by this exact same thinking. And some people don't realize that when Jason Bowers attacked the Tree of Life synagogue, yeah, he talked about immigration, he talked about Donald Trump. He was literally going for the office of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society within the
Yeah,
complex there.
right.
Yeah, because they facilitate refugees, right, coming to the United States. So it's the immigrants that are evil. It's the immigrants that are threatening. It's the immigrants that are invading. All that language is just common, basically, in the Republican Party now.
And speaking about immigrant, I want to remind folks that Donald Trump leaned into when he first went down the golden escalators that weren't golden. He railed against Mexicans, called them rapists and criminals. First order of business for Steve Bannon and Steve Miller in the first Trump administration was the Muslim ban, but they effed it up. Then they got the travel ban thanks to the Supreme Court. Donald Trump, then in 2018, folks, I'm just trying to bring the receipts. He had a strong economy. Instead of running on the economy, they ran with this replacement theory, this white nationalist conspiracy theory, and talked about invasion, invasion, invasion. And then in the second time he ran, do you remember the RNC? They had, what was those signs, folks? You people remember the signs, the deport them now, right? The deportation signs. And now people are saying that the co-presidents, if you will, because Donald Trump is an old man, or the shadow presidents are Russell Vought who's a white Christian nationalist, and Stephen Miller. Before we get to white Christian nationalism, let's talk about Stephen Miller and how he is fueled by, and I don't think enough people say it, he's fueled by a white nationalist agenda.
There is absolutely no doubt. When I was working at SPLC, we got a source who turned over a whole bunch of internal emails about Stephen Miller, things that people didn't know. This was in 20, I think, like late 2019. You can read the stories on the SPLC's website, in which we found that his favorite book, for example, was The Camp of the Saints, which is this racist novel um, against immigrants that's popular in neo-Nazi circles, that he was connected to a whole bunch of white supremacist individuals. In other words, Stephen Miller is directly tied to the white supremacist hate camp in the United States. So let's not be surprised that he would go on this incredibly cruel, violent, and insane deportation spree here in the United States with these masked men and vans and people being kidnapped. That has always been Stephen Miller's goal. He hates immigrants. There's just no way around it. And he hates them from a racial perspective.
And okay, we got Stephen Miller, and you mentioned Camp of the Saints, and I think they're so open about it, Heidi, and because it's white, we give it a pass. We infantilize it. We say, they didn't, don't take him literally or seriously. Oh, Donald Trump had a racial trip up. Oh, he had a racial flare up, right? Which is just remarkable because they're literally telling you the white nationalist plot. And I'm glad you mentioned Camp of the Saints because I've been following it for a while. Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, when they've been asked, what's your favorite book? The book that they recommend to people is Camp of the Saints. And you mentioned how, can you just break down Camp of the Saints for a second? How like batshit racist it is, and how literally it has. I was reading that Camp of the Saints and Turner Diaries are now the foundational texts of the modern white nationalist movement. And for the people who don't understand what I just said, just bear with us. Heidi will break it down.
All right, so The Camp of the Saints is an absolutely disgusting novel. The plot is, so to speak, is that Asian immigrants, like South Asian immigrants, arrive in France. Yeah, exactly. And they proceed to rape, pillage, and kill their way across the country. And I mean in the most graphic terms. They are violent animals destroying white French people. And the book is supposed to be a parable, right, for people about what's going to happen when you let non-white immigrants into the country. The racism in that book, I don't, there is no other equivalent that I can think of. Maybe Which Way Western Man, which is something that the DHS has been referencing on their social media lately, but
Wow.
it's real bad. And it was actually brought to the United States by the architect of the modern anti-immigrant movement, a guy named John Tanton, who's dead now. But he brought Camp of the Saints from France. It's a French book, had it translated, and sold it here. And I can tell you that on the neo-Nazi National Alliance website, when they were functioning, the two bestsellers were Camp of the Saints and the Turner Diaries, which of course is, a rabidly anti-Semitic violent thing in itself.
And can you tell, for the people, I mean, I'm just trying to connect the dots because what's common to you and me isn't common to other people. Can you remind people of the Turner Diaries and what that inspired?
Yeah, the Turner Diaries has inspired more violence, perhaps, than anything else. It inspired, for example, the domestic terrorist group, The Order, in the 1980s, who killed the Jewish radio host Alan Berg. A lot of other mayhem and violence. It's connected to people who are involved in bombings, assassinations, the list goes on. And the book is basically about a white man taking back the United States by assassinating Jews. And it's a violent diatribe about establishing that ethno state and ethnically cleansing the United States like these people want to do.
And the Turner Diaries also inspired Timothy McVeigh, who then, before 9/11, engaged in the worst terrorist act in the bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. So just so people know that this is the book. This is the book, Camp of the Saints, that Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller openly promote and openly say people should read. I just want people to understand that. This is a chief advisor to Donald Trump, who people say are the shadow president, and who is the one who told ICE originally that they have a 3,000 person quota, and they have to arrest, right? So a lot of people say that Stephen Miller is the shadow president, a straight up white nationalist who believes all these conspiracy theories. I don't know why more people don't talk about it, but we're living in the friggin' worst timeline. And on the flip side, other people say that the other shadow president, who's quietly doing the job through bureaucracy, is Russell Vought, one of the co-authors of Project 2025, who is a white Christian nationalist. Can you talk to us about the threat? Oh, just talk about a white Christian nationalist for a second. Let's just get the framing straight and what that means. Because we're not talking about all Christians or white Christians.
No. Um, the distinction is this: Christian nationalism is a political movement, right? It's not a religious movement. It's a political movement that BTQ wants to remove women's reproductive, birth control, and other rights. Its goal is to sort of return us to a fake Ozzie and Harriet white country from the 1950s. I don't know how better to say it. The scariest thing about Christian nationalism is its wish to obliterate the separation between church and state. Mike Johnson, our Speaker of the House, is a Christian nationalist as well. And when asked by reporters, what he bases his ideas on, he says the Bible. He doesn't say the Constitution. And it's a particular conservative reading of the Bible. This isn't mainstream Protestantism, the Catholic Church. It's none of that. It's a particular sect that really, if they had their druthers, women wouldn't vote. Pete Hegseth, our defense secretary, goes to a church where they advocate women not voting. The pastor of this whole sect believes that Southern slavery wasn't bad. These people are real scary, and they would use.
Did you see the CNN segment on these folks last week on the pastor Doug Wilson Church of Christ?
Yeah, I mean, I was writing about Doug Wilson like 15 years ago and never thought in a million years this guy could get near the halls of power. Now he's opening a church right there in Washington. Hegseth is attending it. This guy's ideas are out there. From beating juveniles if they misbehave, taking away women's right to vote. You would not believe the stuff that he believes, and the fact that these kinds of people are sitting in the halls of power is terrifying, and it absolutely should be terrifying for anybody who is from a minority religion, because they're going to wipe that out. It's Christian supremacy, their view of Christianity.
And so, folks, I just want to sit with this for a second, because we're going to gloss it up. Doug Wilson, who is the pastor of this Christ of Church, there was a huge, I think, 6-minute segment done by Pamela Brown where him and his congregants just openly, without any shame, fear, no whitewashing, no dog whistles, just straight up laid out their ideology. They want to repeal the 19th Amendment. Women shouldn't vote. All women should be subordinate to the men. The use of violence against children. Also, this type of racial superiority. The fact there's no separation of church and state. And Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, is a congregant at one of these churches. And when that Pamela Brown segment came out, Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, requoted it with the quote, "All of Christ for all of life." Can you break down what that means, all of Christ for all of life? Like, there's no unsubtlety here.
Now, I'm just, it's even sometimes I am shocked with what's happening in this country right now, that a defense secretary could be proudly affiliated with something like Doug Wilson's churches. It's insane. Look, what this means is that faith, their version of faith, is going to trump everything else. That means getting rid of the Constitution. That means getting rid of civil rights. That means getting rid of all these things and basing all of our lives on, what they term biblical law, which is really Old Testament stuff. That's what they want to impose on the country. And they're not bothered by that at all. And Trump is feeding this with his like anti-Christian bias, task force, the recent rules that State Department folks can proselytize, that you should out your colleagues if they're hurting your religion or disparaging your religion. This is Christian supremacy or Christian nationalism put into action. And Russell Vought, who's at the head of every funding decision that's made in this country, he's a proud Christian nationalist, got no problem with it. And so when you see information about LGBTQ health being stripped off of websites, you see attacks on birth control, you see all the kind of removal of support for women's rights across various agencies. This is all going back to Russell Vought, and this is going back to that version of Christianity that Hegseth is so proud to be affiliated. People who are concerned about gay rights and women's rights and minority rights and religious rights should be terrified of these people.
Literally, Pete Hegseth has written a book called American Crusade. It's all out there. He bragged in that book that he is too extreme even for the modern military. Speaking about the military, when he was in the military, his own colleagues report him as a potential insider threat. And people always say it's the tattoos because those tattoos have now been appropriated by white Christian nationalists, but it's also based on his rhetoric. And this is a man who is openly telling you, "I'm a Christian nationalist," or like literally, what more do you need to see? Another Christian nationalist, a person who went and publicly admitted and acts like a tough guy and said, "Well, if this makes me a Christian nationalist, then so be it," is Josh Hawley. Openly admitted it, folks, right? And so, before I continue, why the F does nobody in America ask these people? Like, I've been on this Doug Wilson, Pete Hegseth thing for a while, like a week. The guy tweeted it, Heidi. Pete Hegseth tweeted it out. No reporter has asked him. They're like, meh. Like, if he was a
I don't know.
Muslim, could you imagine if Mamdani openly supported like the most extreme Taliban-ish like sheikh? Like we're having this dude condemn slogans he hasn't even used, and those are Democrats. Like, can you please explain to me why not a single reporter has that Pete Hegseth? What did you mean by all of Christ for all of life and your support for Doug Wilson and the fact that Doug Wilson wants to repeal the 19th Amendment?
I have no idea why they're not asking these people. I don't know. Maybe racism is involved because you're right. You flip the script, and it would be impossible to be in this situation. I don't know. When I wrote my first story about Doug Wilson, or a colleague of mine did at SPLC, we called it Taliban on the Palouse. Palouse being a river that runs through Moscow, Idaho, right where this church is, Doug Wilson's churches. They're the American Christian Taliban. And there's no pressure. We've also got, Darren Beattie, a guy who spoke at a white nationalist conference, has been appointed to run the U.S. Institute of Peace.
Yeah, he's
What is that? I can't remember the woman's name, but one of the spokesperson at the I think the State Department or Department of Defense has published anti-Semitic writings. Joe Kent, who's now taking over the National
Can you
Counterterrorism
talk about
Center.
Joe Kent? This just happened, and again, I tried my best to promote it. I know at Mother Jones, David Korn did a piece, but he's the only one who I saw do a piece. Can you talk about like Joe Kent? How literally this just happened 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, so the National Counterterrorism Center is supposed to protect us from terrorism. And this guy is a conspiracy theorist. He believes January 6th was done by the FBI. He said this in his confirmation hearings, and he was still confirmed. He's also an election denier. We've got conspiracy theorists running major security agencies that are there to protect us. Kash Patel over at the FBI, director of the FBI, he's a QAnon adherent. He puts QAnon slogans in books he's written. These are dangerous ideas connected to violence, and these are the people running our security agencies. And the list of white supremacists and Christian nationalists who have taken over various parts of this administration is really long. I mean, it's really like personnel is policy. So when I look at
So
all
let's
this,
just name a few, just so people know, and I might not know. So Russell Vought, head of OMB, who is the co-author of Project 2025, Open White Christian Nationalist. Mike Johnson, who like monitors porn with his kid, and I don't know. I'm just making. Wanted to take a crack at him because he's a piece of shit. Mike Johnson, Open Christian Nationalist. Josh Hawley, who supported the violent insurrectionists, but then ran like a coward, but now calls himself a Christian nationalist. Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, who oversees 2 million individuals in armed forces, a budget of 1 trillion, completely unqualified, openly a white Christian nationalist, now supporting one of the most extreme, hateful folks, Doug Wilson. He's a congregant of his church. Stephen Miller, the right-hand man of Donald Trump. Many people say he's a shadow president who is openly affiliated with a white nationalist project. Joe Kent, who just took over the CTC to counter a center for countering terrorism, who is fine with terrorists who engage in a violent insurrection and aligned with these white supremacist groups, militant groups. They see him as his guy. This guy you said, Doug Beattie.
Yeah, there's Darren Beatty over at the U.S. Institute of Peace. There's the entire board of that, rooting out Christian discrimination task force that he's got, like Paula Kane White. Those are all Christian nationalists
Oh yeah.
on that crew. And actually, I won't be able to name these off the top of my head, but this information's all on our website at globalextremism.org. But like the top 5 officials at the Department of Education are either Christian nationalists or related to Project 2025. And it's like that across the agencies. They've stacked these things, especially with people who are behind Project 2025, which is a Christian nationalist effort, right? There's no other way to describe it. So the whole federal government is being run by these people. And I don't get the sense that the public is really aware of this
No,
or that we did a lot of work warning people that Project 2025 was coming, that these attacks on rights would be coming, that the militarization of the border and immigration and all of this. And I think people thought it was hyperbolic before the election. Like they couldn't imagine a world in which this crazy stuff would happen, but it's happening. And they're only halfway through the Project 2025 list of things that they want to do. They're going to criminalize librarians if they share certain books. Like the list goes on and on. So we're in a bad spot, and the lack of attention to it by the mainstream press is really upsetting. I'll also say that when it comes to white supremacist terrorism, right, Waj, you talked about how it's the number one threat. The entire effort to attack that in the FBI, at DHS, and other places to protect us has been completely dismantled. They've just gotten rid of all of it. And maybe I
they don't
shouldn't be.
talk about it.
No, and they've defunded it. There's no more programs combating extremists in the military. The staff that worked on these issues in domestic terrorism at the FBI have been fired or demoted or pushed onto immigration stuff. NCTC isn't going to pay attention to any of these kinds of things. So we are left very unprotected. They defunded all the violence prevention programs to protect us from all kinds of extremism. And, you brought up McVeigh earlier in the Turner Diaries. Let's not forget, people who are veterans of the military or active duty have been involved in a lot of domestic terrorist attacks or attempted attacks, dozens and dozens of them. And Hegseth has just stopped looking for them. So we are all more vulnerable now.
And speaking about that last link about our law enforcement, it reminds me of that great line from Rage Against the Machine, "Killing in the name of." Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Folks, all of it's like having a kangaroo court where the judge and the jury are like literally the lead criminals. What do you think is going to happen, folks? And speaking about not actually rooting out the number one domestic threat, not actually making us safe, not actually going against the number one threat against law enforcement, back to the blue, they actually are erasing all of those monitors, right? And now, just last night, if you saw the 37 folks who work in NatSec who are looking at foreign spying and Russian spying, Donald Trump scrubbed them yesterday, right? So it's like literally a supervillain plot. Up is down. It's like Bizarro World, right? If you're a good guy, you're the enemy. If you're a bad guy, you're part of like Lex Luthor's Justice League dark posse, right? They actually talked about this in the comic book several years ago. What happens if all the supervillains like take over and banish all the good guys? That's what we're witnessing right now in the United States of America. And I do want to talk about these are the folks who are not all of them, folks. I just want to be very careful. But if you see how they're unleashing law enforcement, it's not against the actual threats. It's against immigrants, brown people, protesters. Washington, D.C., Heidi, right here, I'm telling you, there's tanks right in front of friggin' Union Station. I came out yesterday. I'm like, why? And then some of these ICE members, they've caught on camera praising the Proud Boys and denigrating liberals. Talk to us about the link between law enforcement, military, and like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, and how that leads to Donald Trump and this vision.
Well, luckily for all of us, there was a leak of the Oath Keepers membership list a few years
I
ago.
remember that, right?
Yeah, and it was like 33,000 names on the list. A big chunk of them were cops, cop trainers, veterans, active duty military. And I think what Trump is doing with this militarization of our cities is he's activating people with those proclivities, right? Lord only knows who they're recruiting to be ICE agents now with their $50,000 bonuses and, what's going on. And this was a problem that there were attempts to combat under the Biden administration, extremism and policing. The FBI put out reports about this, warned police agencies, there were trainings on this. All of that is out the window. And, I worry about the military itself being radicalized into this political movement now. And I'll just tell you, for anybody who's wondering, is this really white nationalism that's occurring? When the president says that they talk too much about the bad things about slavery at the in the Smithsonian, you
That
know
was
where this
yesterday.
is heading. Yeah. And they're putting back up Confederate monuments and defending, the Confederacy. This, what else could you be supporting but white nationalism? That's what the Confederacy fought for slavery, right? And these are people that they're honoring now. And maybe we should have seen this way back at Charlottesville when Trump said there were good people on both sides. I mean, it was all the indications have been there. People just didn't listen.
Yeah, and Pete Hegseth proudly now says we're going to rename these, camps and these forts, and we're going to bring them back to these U.S. heroes, Confederate soldiers, racist traitors who lost the war. I mean, what more do you need to see? Very fine people on both sides mocking and ridiculing. Oh, I don't know, Mexicans and Muslims saying I think Islam hates us, promoting Nazi conspiracy theories about Haitians eating dogs and pets, even though the Wall Street Journal said that they were told, Vance and Trump were told it was a Nazi conspiracy theory. They still ran with it, quoting Hitler repeatedly, talking about poisoning the blood, promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, dining with Nick Fuentes. Another like Nick Fuentes now because Nick Fuentes has been mainstreamed. Heidi, can you please tell us about Nick Fuentes and his relationship with Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar?
Yeah, I don't understand how a white supremacist and Holocaust denier like Nick Fuentes gets a seat at the table at Mar-a-Lago with the president. But that's the world that we're living in. He's close to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's spoken at Nick Fuentes events. He's got a big following among young males. He's an anti-Semite, and I guess Kanye West was the other dinner guest.
Yeah,
So that
he was the
tells
other
you,
person there. Yeah.
yeah, it tells you everything you need to know. But more than anything else, it tells you what the Republican Party is today, right? In the Bush era, whatever you thought about his policies, if someone was outed as a neo-Nazi, an open white supremacist, something like that, they were gone, right? That party would not have allowed that to be a part of the infrastructure or the power structure. Those days are gone, right? The right doesn't police its own anymore. Anybody is, on the table. Anti-Semite, racist, white supremacist, conspiracy theorist, they don't care. And that's perhaps the scariest thing now, that we have a political party that has mainstreaming hate, or maybe has become, it's a source of hate in such just a few short years, and we can thank
Yep.
Donald Trump for that. And we're going to live with that legacy forever, no matter what happens politically in this country.
And also, let's talk about social media and how this has amplified both hate and conspiracy theories and extremism. I want to remind everyone that Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, and Twitter was always a cesspool, but Twitter was actually never an open playground for Nazis. Can you just tell us what Twitter is under Elon Musk?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually involved in fixing or working on the policies at Twitter before Musk took over, and they were trying to clean up the site. They banned people like, David Duke, right? The former Klansman that everybody knows. But once Musk came in, he just decimated the content moderation teams. He got rid of any efforts to remove hate speech, Nazis, extremists. He's turned it into a big old hate site, basically. And he lowered the bar, but the rest of them are following. So Facebook is removing some of its content moderation policies. Everybody, it's like this race to the bottom. And and it's really unfortunate because we learned at Charlottesville that part of the reason that event happened is because there wasn't any content moderation. And these companies came to see the errors of their ways in the wake of Charlottesville, and now we're going right back to the situation we had before. So, how many millions of young men, young white men, are going to be radicalized into neo Nazism and white supremacy? What is the future going to look like? How much violence are we going to have? Because it's happening on social media. That's where this starts. Before social media, you couldn't just find a Nazi group in 5 seconds. They weren't in the phone book. It was impossible. And it's a little bit like Hitler using the radio to radicalize the German people into anti-Semitism before regulations were imposed after World War II. It's a free-for-all, and it's made all of this worse.
And I want to make two quick links because people don't connect the dots about how much of a hellhole we're in and how we're in a really bad spot, folks. Elon Musk did the double Zig Heil, completely mainstreamed by the eight. Let's just take a shit on Jonathan Greenblatt and the ADL because we have to. Uh, Elon Musk does the double Zig Heil. Heidi I'm going to call it a double Zig Heil. You saw it. What did you think it was?
Well, I told USA Today that I thought it was a Zig Heil, and it was followed by others doing it. It was celebrated all over the internet by white supremacists and racists. We wrote about it. It was insane that this would be allowed to happen. And, but here I am a few months down the road, and it doesn't seem so insane given everything else that's happened in the last few months, right? The white supremacy is so blatant now.
And how about, ADL giving it a pass? And you speak about institutions bending the knee.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna badmouth my colleagues and others at other places.
Oh, look at you. Look at you. I will.
I don't badmouth other nonprofits, but
Okay,
I
so
thought it was a Zeke Hall.
let me badmouth them for you, but that's very nice of you. ADL used to do fantastic work, used to. And their data, especially on white nationalism, could have been trusted, even though if you disagree with their other politics and how they went after groups or pro-Palestinian activists. But the fact that post October 7th, they have completely done a turnaround, right? They used to be like Charlottesville, yeah, this administration is terrible, but like so many other organizations and institutions, they've bent the knee for their own agenda. And they said, oh, yeah, Elon Musk had an exuberant display. I mean, the fact that folks, even some traditional nonprofits that worked on civil liberties are bending the knee. Target, corporations are bending the knee. Paramount, CBS News. This is everyone laying out the red carpet for fascism, and not just fascism, folks. I hope for the almost 1,000 people who've joined us, I'm talking to Heidi Beirich, an expert on hate and extremism, the founder on the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. We're going to have this up for those who missed it later on today. I strongly recommend listening because we connect the dots. What is white nationalism? How it's the number one domestic terror threat? How it's completely interlocked now with MAGA, with their end game. So we're going through all of it for those who joined us late. Don't worry, we're going to have it up in an hour or so. But, another name, and I can't believe I'm saying this. This is why I think America might be cooked. You and me followed this name for several years. We warned about it. We laughed at her, mocked her as she should have been mocked. The right wing mocked her. Now she has the ear of the president. She literally has had multiple meetings with Donald Trump. Donald Trump listens to this lady more than his own national security experts. People have been fired because of her. She calls it, I have their scalps. The national security experts who got taken out yesterday, she has taken credit for removing them. She was so extreme that Twitter, back in the day pre-Musk, actually deplatformed her. And then she, being the nut that she is, handcuffed herself to Twitter headquarters. And now that same nut, one of the leading nutty Islamophobes and conspiracy theorists, who is Jewish but calls herself white nationalist, has the ear of Donald Trump, where he listens to her more than he listens to Marco Rubio or Pete Hegseth and others. I'm, of course, talking about Laura
Laura
Loomer.
Loomer. Yes. I don't know what to say, Raj. She's a crackpot. Rabidly anti-Muslim, a hater, like you said, removed from Twitter for hate speech back in the day. And it's just one more symptomatic. How is the head of the FBI a QAnon guy when the FBI reported that QAnon was a conspiracy theory related to violence? They sent out a warning to law enforcement across the country. I don't know what's going on in this planet, but it is a little bit bizarre universe, and she's one of those people, right? She shouldn't have the ear of anybody, let alone the president of the United States. But, neither should Stephen Miller, neither should Steve Bannon, neither should Pete Hegseth. Um, it's symptomatic of how extremists have taken over the Republican Party because of Trump, right? He opened the door for all these people.
And not just the and folks who are watching us, it's not just it's not just the Republican Party. The Republican Party has control, so they have the House, they have the Senate, they've taken over the federal government, they've taken over FBI, they've taken over ICE, law enforcement, and the Supreme Court. We haven't talked about the Supreme Court. Can you remind? I'll let you, Supreme Court. When I say that they're extremists in black robes, and when I say they have a white Christian nationalist agenda, and yes, even you can be okay. Before I get into it, but Kash Patel isn't white. What do you mean, Heidi? Clarence Thomas isn't white. What do you mean? How can people of color advance a white supremacist agenda? When you hear that, what do you say?
Well, first of all, I think it's a ridiculous position to put people in. We have had examples of people of color, even Jews, who've been involved in extremist movements because they're connected to power and they want power, just like other people do. And also, Kash Patel is connected to QAnon, which isn't necessarily racist, but it's definitely crazy conspiracist, right? It depends on the particular movement. But people of color aren't exempted from these things, but they are few and far between. It's quite amazing how the GOP finds the few of them, you know?
Yeah, and Laura Loomer, folks, openly promotes white nationalism as Jewish. Stephen Miller, it is very important we call him for what he is. He is a white nationalist extremist, is Jewish. Clarence Thomas is perfectly fine promoting a white Christian nationalist agenda. His wife is Ginny Thomas, who supported all these nutty conspiracy theories and the January 6th insurrection. Samuel Alito's wife flew two flags at two properties associated with white Christian nationalism on January 6th. Talk to us about the Supreme Court and your fears about the Supreme Court not being a backstop, but actually a check. No, as being, excuse me, endorser of this agenda.
It just appears that every case that comes to the court, which has got Christian nationalist goal, eroding gay rights, for example, that these cases are accepted. And I should mention Josh Hawley's wife is a lawyer at the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is the anti-LGBTQ, anti-women's rights legal
Right.
powerhouse behind almost all these cases, right? That get to the Supreme Court and start eroding rights that were established for decades. Roe being the one that most people know about, but that's not all of it, right? There's the Masterpiece Cake ruling, etc. And I do think there's a preference, certainly for Alito and Clarence Thomas, because they've been clear about it over the years, a preference for Christian nationalist ideas. They don't want the LGBTQ community to have the equivalent rights to the rest of the country. They would preference Christianity. Clarence Thomas is already on record saying he'd overturn Obergefell, right? The same-sex marriage ruling.
I think they will,
So
Heidi, by the way. That's my prediction. I was talking to a few people. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but people are like, they'll never do that. I'm like, Roe v. Wade, January 6th insurrection, you're still suffering from a failure of imagination. I think they're going to overturn Obergefell. I hope I'm wrong, but continue.
they're going to continue bringing cases to the court to get that, right? There's the Kim Davis case that they're asking the Supreme Court to take up right now, which could lead to the overturning of Obergefell, because Davis is claiming that she was persecuted based on her religious beliefs for not issuing, she was a county clerk in Kentucky, didn't issue same-sex marriage certificates. They'll find a way to bring this. They'll find a way to bring contraceptives up at the court. They've already tried to go after mifepristone. That'll be the next thing on the chopping block. So it's not just about abortion. There's an effort in Texas right now to get rid of no-fault divorce by
Yep.
somebody. All those kinds of rights, which I might add were all the things that Project 2025 said to go after, are at risk with this Supreme Court. And people who don't believe that are being naive. I mean, Hillary Clinton said yesterday, beware on gay marriage, that it's under threat. And she's not being hyperbolic. We should all
No,
be worried about these things.
I think they're going to take it away, folks. And it's a failure of imagination. I can only do my best to warn. Before we talk, we end on a hopeful note. I hope. I think we have to. The thing that unites these folks, because a white Christian nationalist has a different agenda, say, than a white nationalist, which has a different agenda, say, than the broligarchy and Elon Musk, right? But what unites all these allegedly disparate people under the Trump umbrella is this lust and desire for power, for money, and the animating ideology that unites them in this Venn diagram is white supremacy. And I give you Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. Can you talk to us about the white supremacy that fuels the broligarchy's ideology?
Yeah, that's almost like a subsector of of white supremacy, right? The whole broligarchy and their,
Techno fascism.
Yeah, techno-fascism, like Peter Thiel's and some of people like Curtis Yarvin's bizarre interest in authoritarian figures and, decimating democracy. It's a real scary strain of this. You always worry about Elon Musk and his background in South Africa, and if that has informed, sort of his racial thinking and not caring about all this hate that's being spewed on Twitter. I worry about, I think you're right. All of this is coming together partly as a grift, right? A money thing for everybody in these different paths. But it's also about authoritarianism, right? Stopping the advance of human rights and democracy to achieve their agendas. They
Yep.
don't care about the rest of us. They care about their particular interests. And if they're going to use white supremacists to get there, they'll use them. If it's Christian nationalists to ally with, they'll use them. It's real scary, and it's not about what I thought we all cared about, which was equality, democracy,
No.
civil rights. Yeah, I mean, none of that stuff seems to play, right?
And Curtis Yarvin, who's their hilariously buffoonish but terrifying philosopher king, who, by the way, J.D. Vance follows, says that capitalism is incompatible with democracy. And these people all got super triggered, folks, by the Me Too movement and by BLM. The power. They all got triggered by just the marginalized people saying, hey, can we be equal? And they said no, because if you've been in power your whole life, equality looks like what? Oppression. So they're willing to burn down the house. The analogy I've given and others have given, Heidi, is if given a choice between sharing a house with the rest of us or burning down the house, they have elected literally to burn down the village. And I keep, there's one edit I kept saying for about 10 years. I said they want to hijack this country back to 1952. And the reason I use that was that's before Brown versus Board Education, right? The Supreme Court case that said segregation was unconstitutional. And people forget the culture war has always been public schools. It always started with public schools. Roe v. Wade and women was very deliberately added later, like 2 decades later. But it's always been about segregation and racism. But I want to do an edit, Heidi, and I want to ask you this. I think they want to take this country back to actually 1852.
Pre-Civil War, eh? Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. Or at least to when Johnson came in and they ended all the efforts to deal with the aftermath of the Civil War, right? Reconstruction, just dismantle it. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like some of the leadership in this country right now sounds like the sons of Confederate veterans. It's just, well, I mean, they are. They're bringing the Confederacy back, you know?
They're literally trying to bring the Confederacy back, folks. And you have all the Southern pro-slavery states, not all of them, but many of them. Look who's decided to volunteer their National Guard to terrorize innocent folks in D.C. Have you noticed? It's all the former pro-slave Confederacy states. None of, I just feel like I want to bang my head against the wall because I feel like we don't talk about, I always said the twin sins of America that will destroy it are racism and greed, specifically white supremacy and capitalism. And this country refuses to acknowledge it. And it's literally staring us in the face. And we still don't talk about it, Heidi. We still don't talk about it because, like, the worst thing you could call someone is a racist, even though they're acting like a racist, which is why to this day, people still don't call Donald Trump racist. They go, oh, he had a flare up. Oh, economic anxiety, this bullshit term, right? This zombie term, right? But we're witnessing it, folks. And those who have joined us, the 1,000 people, thanks for joining us. Told you, Heidi, this is Heidi's first Substack. So I hope
Yeah.
other people promote Heidi because, I was thinking about talking about this because all this is happening. I'm like, who should I talk about? I'm like, Heidi, of course. I haven't talked to her such a long time. She knows this inside out. Uh, the one thing that there's two things that give me comfort, and maybe only two things. Number one, these people always overreach. These people are incompetent, and a white supremacist vision always fails. It's not only destructive, very destructive to the rest of us, it's also self destructive. The second thing that gives me hope is there are more of us than there are of them. And this country was born out of revolution, and it ain't the 1950s. Too many of us have platforms, too many of us have money, too many of us have property, too many of us are attorneys. Like the world is global. But I don't know. They could also destroy us, Heidi. How do you turn this? How do you flip this? Because we're going up against what I call, and I've been saying it openly, a pro-death cult, a right-wing authoritarian force that is playing for all the marbles, and people who think Donald Trump won't declare martial law to stay in power literally are rejecting the evidence of their eyes and ears. But that's just me. Heidi, I give it to you.
Well, I agree with you. There's more of us than there are of them. And that's not just a wild assertion. That's from polling statistics and whatever else. This isn't 1952, and we're not going back to 1952. This country is demographically different. It's more diverse. I always thought those were good things. The current crop doesn't. So those of us who stand in the majority, we're going to have to stand up. I fear for things like you talk about around the midterms, martial law, something else. We'll have to be in the streets and we have to vote and we have to change this situation. It has to be rebuked. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah, so the one thing that we have, folks, is we have the numbers. This is key. And, because it gets otherwise so depressing. Do not underestimate the power of the majority. And in addition to our voice and our feet, we also have the dollar. This country worships money. The only color that I say Heidi Trump's white is green in this country. And I don't know if you saw today that the CEO of Target is stepping down. And the reason why the CEO of Target is stepping down is because the majority said F you for bending the knee to Donald Trump. And they literally threw their POC customer base under the bus. Like, we used to go to Target all the time. And they said, black people and brown people come to us. Oh, no, Donald Trump. And you aligned with our white supremacist agenda. And so people said, we're going to boycott you. All those sales have gone down. Instead, people went to Costco. Their sales went up because they embrace diversity. And so, folks, this country loves money more than anything. Joe Rogan is slipping in the ratings. The brosphere, people kind of turning on Andrew Schultz and others. The economy is tanking. We're going to go to a recession. I hope I'm wrong. It doesn't seem like it. The Epstein files that they radicalized their own base with, now that their base is radicalized, it's coming after them, right? Because they're in power. I feel that if the majority does its job with strikes, with protests, with boycotts, with speaking out, I think, Heidi, when it comes to taking out fascism, everyone wants a haymaker. I don't think it works that way. I think it's death through 1,000 cuts. You just chip away at it. It's going to be very painful. I think it's a long walk. I think it's going to be generational. I think the damage is generational. But am I right? Am I wrong? What did I miss?
No, I think that's right. This can be stopped. We've seen it stopped in other countries. The quicker, the better in terms of the damage, lasting years and years and years. But it can be done. And so we just have to do it. And it's going to take the things you're talking about. It means regular people saying no to this authoritarian turn.
Regular people, folks, speak out, be loud. There's about 1,000 people watching us right now, which I know it's a freaking depressing subject, but I've been following it for a while. Heidi's been doing it longer. We're masochists. I did this report called Fear Incorporated, the Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America, that came out in 2011, 2 weeks after Anders Breivik's mass murder in Norway. And everyone thought we were crazy, Heidi, because of this 133-page report where we talked about the right wing at that time and how they promoted and created these hateful conspiracy theories. And guess what happened, folks? Anders Breivik went on his mass murdering rampage. He left behind a 1,500-page manifesto. And all the people in that report he cited, he was part of their same ideological infrastructure. And now you fast forward 14 years. I tried my best, Heidi. I tried my best to warn people. You did as well.
I
All those
did. I
people now,
did.
all those people are in the White House or one step removed from the White House, folks. This is not hyperbole. We're dealing with a white supremacist fascist movement that is playing for all the marbles. They want to take this country back to the 1860s. So we have the numbers. We have to do our part. This has been the Left Hook. There are no paywalls. Everything is for free. If you have a couple of bucks, I have 800 kids. Become a paid subscriber. I'm independent. That's why I can speak without fear or favor. This has been Heidi Beirich. Heidi used to be the head of the intelligence project at the Southern Poverty Law Center, tracking all these extremist movements. And then she became the co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. What's the website? I'm going to have it up on my post, but just
Oh,
for
yeah.
people know.
Globalextremism.org.
Globalextremism.org, folks. Follow it. She's done the work. Everyone else, come back in about 3 minutes. I have the mighty Jess Craven, activist, writer. We're going to talk about how Democrats have to fight back against this extremism and hate. That'll be on in about 2-3 minutes. Heidi, come back anytime.
Oh, thanks, Raj. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I kept you longer, but you were on a roll. All right, everyone, take care, be kind, be empathetic, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Take care.
Bye.